Abraham, this is so much fun. I really enjoy your words and the tapes, and it's just been a wonderful contribution in my life.
We're all in this together, aren't we?
We are. I have a question about what's going on in the political scene right now. I spend a lot of time avoiding the news, not reading the newspaper, working on my virtual reality, enjoying beautiful places. But there are people around me who want to talk about that. And particularly my partner, who is pretty upset about what's going on and can get pretty stirred up. And my question is, could I have some suggestions on how to think about it?
What you're saying is, there are these thoughts that I think, and when I think them, I feel bad. So could you show me how to think these thoughts that make me feel bad in a way that make me feel good? And we say, well, we wouldn't think about them. And you say, but people around me want me to think about them. So is it possible to think about bad feeling thoughts and feel good? And we say, well, that's really what we're talking about here in this path of least resistance. You can work things around in a way that you can find a way out of them. So throw some things up that your partner talks about or observes, or that you've been observing that make you feel bad, and let us see if we can help you find a path of least resistance. You knew even before you came here that what Abraham usually says is, with all of the millions and billions and trillions, and Esther says cajillions of possible thoughts that you could choose, why take a bad feeling one and try to turn it into a good one? Why not just pick from among all of those something that makes you feel better? And we still really mean that. In other words, we would not torture ourselves with things that don't feel good. But at the same time, you live in a world where there are conditions around you, and you're going to constantly be faced with observing things, and there isn't anything wrong. In fact, there's everything good about finding a way to soothe yourself into a place of allowing things to flow. In other words, after all, you do live in a contrasting universe where you're wanting to choose thoughts and bring them into a place that they are serving and beneficial in nature. So maybe that's what we'll do here. So throw something out and we will show you how we would find a path of least resistance within the thought.
Well, when he speaks, he's upset about choices that are being made by the politicians in the country. He's upset about the possibility of war with Iraq. He is upset by almost everything President Bush says. And I have other friends that feel that way too. People send me emails. It shows up in my life.
So pick any part of that and let's find a path of least resistance.
Okay, the possibility that doesn't seem to be anything that can turn this political administration from a war with Iraq.
Before we do this, we want to say one thing, and that is, when you see yourself as in competition with another idea, in other words, you say, or your mate says, I don't think that we should go to war with Iraq. I don't think it's any of our business. And the other thought is, it is everything about our business and we should go to war. When you are taking one place against another, then the natural process is for you to gather even more resistance in order to make your point, which is exactly the opposite of what is beneficial for you. Quite often when we are visiting with friends and we want to show them the path of least resistance, they seem to be almost deliberately looking for a path of greater resistance. And it's not that they have a self-destructive nature, it is that they are so accustomed to finding their ground and holding their ground and defending their ground, that in order to defend their ground, they've just got to stir up a whole lot more resistance in order to justify where they stand. So it's natural to see that happening. And in fact, that's what you're seeing on the whole political scene. Everybody's sort of doing that. The good news is, it is not the order of the universe. The good news is that there's far more well-being than there is not well-being. So even when there are pockets, even big pockets, as major players as your government or your armies are, still the well-being is a stronger stream. And you can join the stream of less resistance, if you want to, more easily than you will join the stream of greater resistance. But it does take a decision. So having said that, so the thought is, I really don't want to go to war with Iraq. And then the next thought is, but I have nothing to say about it. And then the next thought is, they're going to do it. And then the next thought is, babies are going to die. And then the next thought is, it's going to destabilize their country. And then the next thought is, it's going to stir up the rest of the Arab world. And then the next thought is, and so can you see how we were deliberately reaching for thoughts of greater and greater resistance, all in an effort to justify our decision and all in an effort to point out how right our decision is. But still, we are reaching for greater resistance. And you know it when you're paying attention on a feeling level, because you feel worse and worse and worse and worse. Jerry's words to Esther over something like that are, you're stirring yourself up, or don't get stirred up over that. And those are really good words, aren't they? In other words, you are deliberately stirring yourself up over that. So now let's take the other tack. Not trying to defend anything, not trying to point out that I'm right and that George Bush is an idiot, not trying to point out that they don't know what they're doing and that they're instead just trying to find the path of least resistance for me right here, right now. So which thought feels better? In other words, does it feel better to imagine war and imagine terrible atrocities, or does it feel better to imagine it dissipating quickly? Well, it feels better to imagine it dissipating quickly. But I don't have control. That's reaching for more resistance. I don't need control to imagine it dissipating quickly. Does it feel better to imagine it blowing up and dissipating quickly, or does it feel better to imagine it not escalating to that point at all? Well, it feels better to imagine it not escalating to that point at all, but I don't have control over that. Now I'm reaching for more resistance. That's not the question here. The question is, which thought feels better to me? Does it feel better to assume that my government has information and is telling me the truth, or does it feel better to assume that my government is making it all up? Which feels better? And many would say, but there's evidence one way or the other. And we say, we're not asking which is true, we're asking which feels better to you. And you say, yes, but what good is that, Abraham? What good does it do just to soothe me? The war's either still going to happen or it isn't. And we say, never lose sight of the fact of how important it is for you to feel good. You're not going to change the course of human events necessarily, but you're going to change the course of your events. There have been and always will be wars, because there have been and always will be those who have differences of opinion. And because there have been and always will be those who will inflame their resistance in order to support their stance or their opinion. But that does not mean that you need to do that. As people are making themselves sick over things, do you help them out by making yourself sick over the same thing? You never say, I've been so well for so long, I think I'll be sick for a while so that sick people can be well. Because you don't think that their sickness or wellness is about your using it all up. And so this connection with Source is the same thing. We know that it isn't easy to live in the world, to be of the world, and not respond to the conditions of the world. And in fact, you intended to do that. Don't let the conditions that you are observing set the tone of your vibration. You decide the tone of your vibration first, and that's where your intent really has to come in. You have to say, I intend to thrive. I intend to be connected to source energy, and I intend to find a way to do that, and everybody else can do what they want. Now, it might be the path of least resistance for Jerry and Esther to drive down the freeway if speed and efficiency is their dominant intent. It might be the path of least resistance for them to get out and backpack somewhere if a week of leisure and detachment is their dominant intent. The intention that you hold is so important in you determining for yourself what the path of your least resistance is. So, as you're thinking about what's happening with your government, if your intention is to change world events, and you don't believe that you're in a position to do that, you're not going to give yourself any path of least resistance. If your intent in reaching for the thought is to soothe yourself into physical well-being and clarity, then you are. If you are looking into world events and you are realizing that it does not matter what political party of what nation is dominant, the majority of the people on your planet are living in an unaffected way. There are endless laws and rules, even in your society here in this nation, that do not affect you because you are not aware of them and you do not keep them active in your vibration. The majority of your population, we would say so close to 100% of it, breaks laws every single day of one kind or another. And yet you are not 100% incarcerated, although that percentage is rising. You can take anything and find a path of least resistance or a path of greater resistance. It just depends upon what your motive is. There are those who would find war as the path of least resistance, and they would be right to follow that path. There are those who find war as a path of most resistance, and we would not encourage them to follow that path. We cannot say to you that war is always wrong or that war is always right. We could not even say to you that the same war at the same time is all one way or another. These are individual paths. And as you stand back and you look at your nation, you see what a small percentage of people are actually involved in the war. As Jerry and Esther were driving, they saw caravans of war equipment going somewhere. It's on its way probably from El Paso to Houston or some port where it will be shipped. And so it kept coming up. And finally, Esther said to Jerry, "The only resistance in our joyful journey is you observing these war machines in motion." And Jerry laughed because he could feel that he would forget about it and they would get back into their blissful place. And then another caravan would pass and then he would get all tense about it. And then he would get very quiet as he was not wanting to speak it out loud, but Esther could feel it in his vibration. And then he would make a comment. It's hard to have your personal opinions about something and not have a knee-jerk response to things that you are observing. But when you again and again say to yourself, nothing is more important than that I feel good, in time, rather than revving up your path of most resistance in order to justify your opinion, you'll instead rev up your path of most allowance in order to justify your well-being. It all depends on what you're looking for. Now hear us. We did not say that everyone that is promoting the war is promoting from a place of resistance. For some, it is the path of least resistance, you see. You've just got to make their choices none of your business. Whether it's the choice of your president, who is clearly wanting to go there for reasons that he has still not told you, or whether it's your mate who doesn't want it to happen for reasons that he could not completely divulge to you. In other words, you are all much more complex than any communication in a short period of time would unravel. So we wouldn't try to sort it out. We would just begin to acknowledge there are things that when I think about them, they really feel good, and there are things that when I think about them, I don't feel so good, and I'm learning to guide my thoughts toward the things that really feel good, and I'm beginning to let the things that don't feel good be none of my business. In exactly the same way that you do not go to a restaurant and demand the waiter to see everything in the kitchen before you eat there. You don't say, I want only the ingredients that appeal to me to be prepared in this kitchen. You say, from among this, I would like this and this and this and this and this. And you leave the others for people who might want to participate in them. And somehow that's easy for people to understand with food, but it's hard for people to understand with everything else. It's like everybody should agree with me on the things that really matter to me. And we say, why? Why do you need agreement from others? They have nothing to do with your path of least resistance. And you say, well, but I worry because if they are allowed their erroneous opinions and actions, then couldn't they get themselves and then me into a predicament where I would not be as well off as I am? In other words, couldn't they, in their path of most resistance, couldn't they, in their not practicing the art of allowing, couldn't they pinch off my well-being? And we say, not possible, unless you join them in the thought and use what they're doing or what they're not doing as your excuse to not allow the energy to flow. We promise you, we want to find a way to say it. If you will mind your own business and feel good, you must thrive. It can be no other way.
What do I do when I come home from work and greet my partner and he wants to talk about being upset about the war and what the president is doing and what's happening on the 5:30 news? Do I listen and try to uplift him? Do I go away?
Yeah, let's walk through this. Yeah. So walk away from him with your opinion that he shouldn't go there, or stay and share some time with him, which feels like the path of least resistance for you.
Staying and sharing.
It really does, doesn't it? So now you've decided to stay and share some time with him, but he's really on a rant and he's getting himself all stirred up and you don't want him to, but walking away still feels like the wrong thing to do. And taking George Bush's side certainly is not the right thing to do. In other words, you can feel that that would not be the path of least resistance.